Don't let preconceived notions, define you. What you really ought to do is look at opportunities of asking why not.
Do you think that being a PA or an NP means that you are seeing patients in an outpatient clinic or in the hospital? And that's pretty much what the profession entails. Well, you'd be right to an extent. That is the basics of what we do. But PAs and NPs can do so much more. And we often think of ourselves in this little box, but there are PAs and NPs doing things that I'm sure you have never even thought about. Today, I am going to be interviewing one of those PAs. He is a clinical scientist, and he's going to talk to us about what he's doing, the work that he is doing that is putting him on national stages and really changing people's perspective of what a PA is and what a PA can do. And I love his philosophy is instead of us asking, like, can we do that, or being timid and thinking that we only can fit in this one little area, he's talking about being bold by asking, why not? We're highly intelligent people. We have medical training. We've demonstrated that we have the ability to learn and grow. So why do we limit ourselves? So if you're interested in learning about what a clinical scientist is, or if you want to hear about a different way that PAs are being represented out in the world, then please stay tuned.
Hi, my name is Viet Le. I'm a PA, and I've been practicing for the past 18 years.
Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you being here.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Now, we're interviewing you today for you to talk about being a clinical scientist. And we're going to be diving into exactly what that is, and so people understand what your job is. But can you give us a little kind of a brief glimpse of what your career path has been since graduation that has led you to this position?
Yeah, I graduated in 2004. I started immediately into cardiology as a clinical cardiology PA and practiced really general cardiology. I was there for about 2 years and had an opportunity to go and practice some occupational medicine at the VA here in Salt Lake City in their compensation pension department. So a lot of causal type of analysis. I then had an opportunity to come back to my original cardiology group, but in the guise of a researcher. They had just created this position about a year prior. And so I had an electrophysiology PA partner who hired me and then promptly went back into clinical medicine. So I it was a little odd. I felt kind of left alone because it wasn't something we do. We just are not trained as PAs to do, clinical research. And to be honest, what they were hoping was to hire someone dynamic enough to create the position, to really flesh it out. Now, you might have in your mind, well, they have these tubes and it's a bench science type of lab. But where I worked is not an academic center per se. We don't have that type of research, at least not bench science research. We do clinical trials. And so a lot of, think about therapeutics, the pharmacologic agents we have, the devices that we use, especially in cardiology. And then we do some mechanistic studies.
Are you doing 100% research? Are you working clinically as well? How is your time divided?
I was hired as a dedicated researcher, so 100% in research. Amongst our medical colleagues that are physicians, when they come out into practice, they will typically be clinicians who have quote unquote protected time. And then that protected time is their research time. Well, one would argue that my entire career is protected time. I actually have to fight for clinical time. And so what I was hired to do was really to support both investigator initiated studies, meaning we have clinicians who have an idea and they want to begin a study. So they put the proposal together, they write the protocol, they get it funded, and it's their study. They then move that forward. So
And
it's
these
an
are
invest.
clinicians in your group?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and I would be included in that, right? So actually, I can announce now that I have had a proposal approved in the area of peripheral arterial disease, and so I am the principal investigator of that study. While it's sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, they didn't come up with it; it was me, and then they funded it. So that's only a part of it, right? So there's these investigator-initiated studies that can be data studies, which this one will start out as a data study to understand peripheral arterial disease management, and then it'll move forward into a prospective phase where we say, okay, we've learned where the holes and the gaps are. Now, let's talk about when we implement certain therapies or maybe even a practice strategy, what does that do on outcomes? So that will be a prospective trial. On the other side of the fence, of course, is what you normally kind of think about, not bench science, but clinical trials that will discuss a therapy in a population for a disease state, and then placebo controlled, it's blinded, randomized, and then at the end of 3 to 5 years, what happened. Those are the type of trials that I've been involved with, many of them lipid trials, but more recently we've been looking at I guess they're still new, SGLT2 inhibitors, certainly again in the lipid space, PCSK9 inhibitors, and now we're looking at, actually, I'm very excited about GIP, GLP-1RA medication. So I won't give the branded, but it's tirzepatide is the generic.
So does all of your research revolve around cardiology?
Yeah, I am a cardiovascular researcher. So we actually share our research floor, which again, it's not a bunch of lab, materials and pipettes and all that. It's just a bunch of people in an open floor, and study coordinators. Myself, I'm probably the only clinician on the floor. But on the other side are our pulmonary partners and their trials, their clinical trials.
Your colleagues that are also doing research, are a lot of them PAs or NPs, or are you kind of an anomaly?
Yes, I'm an anomaly. I have tried, and unfortunately, like I said, the individual that helped hire me, he left back to clinical practice, and over my 10 years, we hired another APP, advanced practice provider, in this case, a nurse practitioner, and she was with me for probably 5 years and then left. We've never replaced that person. All throughout Intermountain Healthcare, I am the only advanced practice provider that is 100% research and for the purpose of moving forward our research program at Intermountain.
Well, thanks for representing, but there definitely is lots of
Need
room
more.
for PAs and NPs to move into this space.
Absolutely.
Now, does there seem to be resistance to PAs and NPs coming in, or is it just haven't found the right candidate, or are there just no openings? What is the reason that there's not more coming in your experience? I mean, I know you can't speak nationwide, but
No, it's a unique setup at Intermountain. As I said before, I'm not really in an academic center. And so you have competing interests. The first is that we are a healthcare system, and it's a nonprofit built upon this idea that we deliver care. And so research, while we say it's a big part, and it has been a big part of what we do and how we move forward treatment. It, we're not an academic center. And so it's hard to convince folks that are not researchers. We are always vying for funds, and the mindset going upwards in administration is really about healthcare delivery, not discovery. And so that's made it difficult as a paradigm to try to hire folks like myself.
so what is the value that you're bringing? I mean, obviously, research in any form brings value to the whole scope of medicine, but specifically, are you having direct impact on how other providers in your healthcare system and I guess around the world are actually practicing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always say this. People always say, "Why research?" Man, we got into this to treat the patient, and I think it's a little bit ignorant to think that way because what I do influences what you do. And I'll tell you that as I was part of the Fourier trial, which is evolocumab, now Repatha, and boy, what do we use? We use PCSK9 inhibitors. It's part of the guideline now, and I can definitely treat the patient in front of me. And you can only double book so many people. You can only carry so many hours of clinical practice. But if I improve practice, that gets disseminated out to all clinicians, and then I affect even more change amongst the community and improve healthcare.
Are you kind of insulated in your medical center, or are you actually having other providers, MDs, and different people coming to you and getting your input and what they're on their day-to-day practice at times? I mean, not every patient, but do you have that kind of interaction with the actual practice, other practicing colleagues, or are you more just stuck in a research area?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say that if I were any other person and had not been as curious and gregarious with working in clinical medicine, that could have happened easily. In fact, I made sure they understood that I needed to be in clinical practice. So I fought for clinical time. But interestingly, I mentioned at the beginning that I had this opportunity to come back to cardiology in a group that was my previous private practice companions, now absorbed into the local healthcare system. So I joined it as a research PA, the same colleagues that were my in the trenches colleagues just 7 years prior when I was practicing cardiology. And I am very deeply involved with their practice because I've developed over the past 2 to 3 years with my partner, Jeff Anderson. We developed a cardiology or preventive cardiology clinic. And in that, of course, is a lipid clinic. And so, yeah, it's fun. I get texts, I get emails from our cardiology partners, not just advanced practice providers, but from my interventional colleagues, my imaging colleagues who are trying to manage patients, but they recognize they have local experts in Jeff and myself in terms of lipid practice. But yeah, I am constantly in communication with our inpatient acute coronary syndrome teams, our STEMI teams. And I make sure that I avail myself to meetings so that I am part of heart failure conversations, that I am part of EP and also interventional and structural heart. That's on me, actually. I make the time to be involved in those. Otherwise, yeah, I could be relegated very easily to an isolated, siloed position.
We talked about you being kind of a little bit of an anomaly at the center that you're working at, but I assume that you're kind of plugged into the whole research community as a whole around the country and probably at times have gone to different conferences and things. What are you seeing as far as PAs or NPs in the research space? Does it seem like that's a growing area for us? Or does it still seem to be just a few people here or there?
That is one thing that's been nice about being a research PA is I've been afforded the opportunity to be part of scientific sessions for cardiology on the big stage because we are always submitting abstracts and presenting since 2013 forward. I've presented at almost every single American College of Cardiology conference and American Heart Association conference each year. So at least 20 times, right? But even now, like next month, I am one of the social media ambassadors for the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, but I've presented there as well and have been faculty in their conferences, as well as invited faculty at American College and American Heart. So this is a unique position that's given me the opportunity to network, as you say, nationally, because I get to know other principal investigators, sub-investigators on studies that we share these things and we go into meetings together at those conferences. That's usually when we network. The hard part about this, and gets to the core of your question, is it hasn't grown much in 10 years with regards to meeting other advanced practice providers and research. And I think that's because systemically, they're not, we are not seen as partners at the table. So I would like to see this change. I mean, this is one of the reasons why things like this podcast is important because I think it hopefully opens the eyes of our advanced practice provider partners that this is doable and really doable at a level that's very successful, that you have autonomy, very similar to clinical practice. But I would say this: we need more. There's room at the table. There really is. What I have run into are what we call medical science liaisons. MSLs. And those are the individuals in pharmaceutical companies and device companies that are part of their research arm, not the pharmaceutical sales rep side. Now, there are PAs that are part of the sales rep side, but they're firewalled. And in these companies, the MSLs, they're fun. They're amazing to see. And there are quite a few PAs. I didn't realize this, but
Yeah.
there are quite a few PAs and nurse practitioners that are MSLs.
So are you kind of saying that in a way that you're similar as far as the fact that in research, PAs and NPs having that base medical knowledge can accumulate more knowledge and can add to the space and add to the conversations out there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's such a weird dichotomy that folks place APPs in, like we're only trained to one level, and you never learn anything more. It's kind of a weird thing. I don't understand that. In many ways, I think the model that can be proposed to research centers that are looking or are interested in adding an advanced practice provider is to say, look, the medical model that we work in collaborative team practice reaches over to the research side as well, where I provide benefit as a PA in the clinical world. I provide the same kind of context and nuanced help in the research world, including if you give me time. Oh, I'll learn how to design protocols. I'll learn all of those things that are important from a regulatory standpoint. And, ultimately, if you want me to get a PhD and that's the level that you want to be a director, I can do that. But what I find is that the research is also a subspecialty in itself, and it can be learned and it can be performed. But a lot of the principles are very similar and cross over in terms of medical or research, how you interact. So I see patients, I can prescribe, I can do inclusion exclusion criteria for enrollment. I can make those decisions of adjudication if there's an adverse event or a serious adverse event. So those are things that are helpful, I think.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting the more that I talk to people and learn about different careers people have, that how many times we kind of paint ourselves, I think, into this little space that we live in, that this is all that we can do, when there are RNs out there doing all kinds of things. And, nothing against them. And they have their own training and they, have a lot of knowledge and stuff. But we have a lot of knowledge and a lot of training, and we have a master's degree, and sometimes we still feel like we're afraid to step into these roles. So that's why I love to talk to people like you to show that there are lots of different areas that we can move into. I think we have to look at our profession ourselves differently before other people look at it differently.
No, I agree, Michelle, and I think that's why really don't let preconceived notions, define you. And that's what's been fun. I think folks have a hard time pinning down what kind of things that I'm limited to doing because I just keep doing things, and I find ways to do more without being asked.
Yeah.
What you do is you say, "Gosh, this is such a wonderful tool, whatever it is, this position or this study and da da da. What can I do more with it?" And as you do that with confidence, folks just assume that you can do it because you assume you can. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're, within the laws and not,
Sure. Yeah.
stepping out
Yeah.
of your scope of
Absolutely.
practice. But what you're saying is there are a lot of things that we can do that people never even consider or think about. So tell us a little bit about kind of then the practical stuff as far as like, what does your schedule look like? Are you working like a Monday through Friday schedule? Kind of what hours do you keep? Those kind of things.
What would my spouse want me to work or what? It's different. It is different. I will say the most regulated time in my week is clinic time, because then I have a beginning and end in terms of seeing patients. Now, we all know it doesn't ever really stop there, right? You're doing your charts and you're following up on stuff. So that kind of part happens. I have a half day clinic in the afternoons. Monday, that's general cardiology. and a little bit of pulmonary hypertension, HFpEF, etc. But then my Tuesday morning is my preventive cardiology clinic, and so those are fairly well defined. The other hours, and where are they? I could readily make this an 8 to 5 job if I wanted to. But the reality is that because I'm part of so many different studies, those studies have different cohorts and patients. Some of them are inpatient, some are outpatient, some are seen in certain settings that are not traditional in terms of hours. And so, whatever the study coordinator is doing really dictates when I need to be available. So it's expanded. I can tighten it as much as I want, but I've asked the question, why not? And so I've allowed for the possibility of doing all these things, and doing them all times at all hours.
So, what about compensation as a clinical scientist? Do you feel that it's been kind of a lateral move? Does it have the opportunity to, is there more money in it, or is it even maybe a step down?
I will say that originally it was quite a step down from my occupational medicine role. In fact, it was about a 50% cut pay, which is still good. I mean, I work at a professional level, and I'm not going to lament at all the pay. After 10 years and having done what I do, the value has been added back to me. I'd say I'm probably on par with my clinical partners.
So, for people who are listening who find this interesting, who really think they'd love to get into research or have thought about it in the past, what advice would you give them? Is there anything practical, like any particular places that you would point them to help them find their way into this field?
Nowadays, there are DMSc programs, Doctor of Medical Science programs, that do have kind of the beginnings of research, and give you an idea of protocol design and things like that. But what I would say is, honestly, go back through the medications that you prescribe and run back through the trials. Read the seminal papers on those classes of drugs. And what you'll begin to understand is what the research mind is. You define a disease, you define a possible therapeutic agent because there's a gap. So once you understand the disease and the progression of the disease, then you say, what's the gap? What are we not treating, or what are we not treating well? And then comes this therapeutic agent. And that's where the trial goes. So if you want to get into research, understand that. Get into the mindset of why phase 3 clinical trials are run, and how they're run through the publication. Now, it's a totally different world on the back end of how it ultimately happens, but understanding the final product gives you a sense of reverse engineering what needs to be done. And then get to know your MSLs. Get to know your MSLs. Those medical science liaisons will really start to get you thinking and your juices flowing as to, like, what studies are ongoing now, what kind of opportunities are available. I mean, become an MSL if you want. I prefer to be part of the clinical side where the research is implemented, not necessarily tied to any one pharmaceutical company as a medical science liaison. But I think that those are the probably the top two things is get to know phase 3 trial reports, the finished product, and then get to know your local MSL. They would love to, because actually they'll help develop education programs in the disease state for your area. It can be non-branded, and you can help them by maybe even presenting that data to your local huddle or in service, or your, whatever you get together on a monthly basis. Maybe you can start to present those kind of things and really get comfortable. Like, yeah, I can take data and I can actually speak the data in a clinical, pragmatic way. And boy, I'd like to be part of research. But those are the steps that I say would get your feet wet and get you comfortable in those formats.
And are there any like national societies or anything that are helpful to belong to or that put on conferences?
So if you have a specialty that you're practicing, go to that major specialties conference, and don't go to exhibit halls to just kind of pick up swag. Sit down and talk to the people in there and be naive as you want to feel ignorant if you want to be. That's okay. Their whole purpose is to teach you. Go to your conferences because they won't give you the nuts and bolts of how research is done, but it gives you a sense of the final product. Again, if you're in research, that's where you ultimately want to present it, at a scientific session, at a scientific conference. I'm at ACC, the American College of Cardiology. I'm at American Heart Association. I present at American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, National Lipid Association. These are all cardiology specific, but in different subspecialty areas. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun. So whatever your physician specialty organization is, be part of that. And I will tell you that most likely there is probably a PA or nurse practitioner component. Be part of those. I think it's very helpful, not only engagement wise with your colleagues, but teaches you what's being talked about and what the gaps are.
So, what other words of wisdom or any parting things that you'd like to share with people out there listening about being a clinical scientist?
For those that are interested in doing research, don't be intimidated. You can join research at any level, whether you just want to get your feet wet as a study coordinator, even as a PA or nurse practitioner, just starting in that study coordinator role. Or if you have study coordinators at your facility, tag along. If you've got a moment, go tag along and say, can I see what you guys do? If you have researchers that are colleagues, tag along with them. You never know. They're like, you know what? I could use you. I could really use you as a partner in the research space. Nothing's cooler than having a colleague ask me about my research, and then they're like, "Wow, really? We do that here?"
Well, thank you so much, Via. This has really been interesting. I've loved hearing about what you're doing. Thank you for being such an amazing representative as a PA, and thank you for encouraging other PAs and NPs to step out of their comfort zone.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. It's fun. It's fun being advanced practice providers. We have so much to give, and so I'm excited, and thank you for having this podcast, because it will open the eyes of many of our colleagues that there's so much more we can be part of.
If you're working in medicine and you're unhappy in the position that you're currently in, there are lots of different options. So keep an open mind, watch these videos, think about what might be the right fit for you, and don't be afraid to make a move. You never know what life is going to hold for you. Thank you for joining me. Take care, stay sane, and I'll see you next time on the Medicine Couch. Bye.